ready to just give a little bit of reflection here as we come close to the end of our weekend together, our weekend of practice together, on the topic of recalling what compels you to practice. Recalling what compels you to practice. And one of the similes that we brought forth was the simile of the mountain. So this discourse, this text that describes a teaching by the Buddha to King Pasenadi. And in that discourse, he brings forth very clearly both aspects of a human life, a human life as pressed in upon by the reality of aging and illness and dying. And he also mentions the preciousness of human life, how precious human life is, meaningful. And so this is looking at the function, this is pointing at the function of impermanence in our lives. So what we've been trying to do is draw a thread of how we experience impermanence as human beings in our lives, as both potentially a cause of difficulty when we have yet to really come to some acceptance of the way in which impermanence shifts, transforms our bodies and minds, and as a beautiful opportunity, an opportunity that is present for us at all times, that we can access any time we're ready. So this pervasiveness of impermanence is key, is a very important principle to tune into. And we've talked about different frameworks that we can use for doing precisely that. So using, for example, mindfulness, the foundations of mindfulness, mindfulness of the body, mindfulness of the feeling tone of a thing or any kind of contact, mindfulness of mind itself, the state of mind, or sometimes called the attributes of mind, then mindfulness of dhammas, or principles at work, the way in which certain patterns of thinking and feeling and behaving lead either to more suffering or lead to freedom. So that's one of the frameworks that we offered, and within that we find, in some versions of the Satipatthana, we find the six senses practice. So enabling us to focus on very specific points of contact in our experience, and to see how those sense organs are in a continual process of receiving the world that we experience as outer, right? That inner and outer is always in an interaction. And we've looked at the vipallasa, the distortions of perception, or the ways that we very commonly are confused or in denial about the way things really are. So many, many, many different frameworks that we can apply so that each moment becomes an opportunity for practice. But sometimes, as we've also touched upon a little bit, both I and Chita and I, sometimes it can seem like it's all too much. Sometimes it can seem like we're just too busy to deal with it. Or that it's actually difficult to receive this information, to practice so directly with these realities. Or that we'd really rather that it was different. So in those cases, what I want to talk about today, just briefly, is to talk to you about the 3 C's. The 3 C's of practicing with impermanence in your everyday life. Because now we'll go on from retreat into a different mode, potentially into a different mode of being in practice. So what are some of the things that you might want to keep in mind as you shift? So the first C is continuity. Continuity practice. In my experience, practice can develop a momentum of its own. It actually can develop a certain kind of energy that helps to carry us along, that helps so that we can shift from a very, at times, from a very strong kind of efforting in practice and a very directed kind of practice into an effort that's a little smoother and less driven. But in order for that to happen, we need to maintain a kind of continuity about the practice. And so this is really very important. And it hinges on beginning to see that practice isn't just the aspect of sitting on your cushion, but that we have this instrument, this body and mind, which can be turned to be an instrument of practice. And so the practice is always here with us in every moment. So I'll tell you briefly one of my favorite teaching stories. I tell the story very often about mindfulness, for example, and how mindfulness in everyday life can actually bring forth aspects of our experience that we might not otherwise pay attention to. So I was part of a group of folks who were leading a year-long program for lay folks who were involved with San Francisco Zen Center. So this was specifically for people who are not in residence at the Zen Center, but who wanted to get engaged in a group of people who are going to practice over a period of time. And so the larger group was broken up into cohorts. So there were 6 of us leading it, and each one of us had about 12 people in our smaller group. And so we met with our smaller group a couple times a month, and then we would meet with the larger group the other times that we were getting together. And there was a young woman that was in my cohort, which was in the East Bay, at that time, East Bay of San Francisco, so like Berkeley, Oakland area of California. And very capable young woman, had been practicing for a number of years at that point, maybe 4 or 5 years. And we began the program with a homework assignment. And the homework assignment was to every morning observe which foot you put in your skirt or your pants or your shorts or your kilt or your dress or whatever it is that you're putting on, your sabang, each day. I sense she's already laughing because she knows the punchline to this story. It's a very uplifting story, I think. In any event, so that was the homework. The homework was just figure out which foot goes in first, the left foot or the right foot, when you're getting dressed in the morning to whatever is your lower part of your outfit. And so this young woman came to me about a month or so after, maybe even 6 weeks or so after we'd started the program and moved on to the second month's homework. And she said, I cannot remember, I can never figure out which foot I put in first. Every day, or 5 days a week, I get to my car to go off to work and I think to myself, oh my gosh, I again did not notice which foot went in first. So she's a little bit frustrated and kind of, flummoxed, frustrated. Like I should be able to do this, but so far I haven't been able to do this. So we talked a little bit about the energy of habit and how habits can keep us from being really present for what's happening. We think that it's making life easier, but it's actually distancing ourselves from our lives, habits. We talked a little bit about being aware and observing in the moment before the moment that you're trying to be present for, right? So that if you're aware before that moment that you're trying to observe, then you have a better shot at it. We talked about a little bit about slowing down. So she was the mom of a young child, a little 3-year-old girl, and she had her job and she was married and her husband also had a job. And so imagine that the household was kind of busy in the morning. So we talked about all those things. And then shortly thereafter, maybe less than 2 weeks later, she came to me and she said, guess what? Guess what? I saw which foot I put in first. And I said, great. Which foot do you usually put in first? She said, usually I put in my left foot. She said, but that's not the coolest part. So I said, well, what is the coolest part? And she said, the coolest part is that my daughter also puts her left foot in first. So it's a beautiful story because not only did this young woman become more aware of her own body and mind and more present for her experience, but she also became more aware and more present for the experience of this child, this person that she lives with every day that she loves. You know? And so by knowing this, then maybe she can even have a tiny, tiny bit of less conflict, less suffering in her life too, because she knows that her daughter's preference is usually going to be for the left foot. And she can be mindful and aware of her as well. So it opened up a new opportunity for her, you see, of something that was already there, already happening right in front of her face. But what had to happen was that awareness was there. Certainly, she was able to get dressed in the morning and she was able to dress her daughter. But attention was not lined up with awareness. That's the mindfulness part, right? That's making even an act as simple as putting your foot in your shorts an act of practice. So these are the kinds of opportunities that are presented every single day by impermanence. And so the other next step for her would be to continue to be aware and to observe when her daughter decides, today I want to put my right foot in first, and not get into a conflict about that, right? Because things are impermanent. Her preference might change, or this woman's own preference might change. She might notice over time, something happens to her hip as she gets older, and then she shifts to the other foot. So these are the kinds of things that seem very small, and yet they're opening up a window into our reality such that we can be more present and we can have less conflict and less suffering. So continuity of practice. This body, this mind, it's always here. It's always here. So might as well, use it as a proper tool. Might as well allow it to demonstrate for you these principles of reality that we're trying to wake up to. Then the second C, so that's the first C, C for continuity. The second C is C for courage. Courage. So we've touched on this a little bit as well. Courage in practice is incredibly important because we are going to see things that are uncomfortable. We are going to see things that are potentially scary. We are going to see things, we're going to see gaps between our ideals of how we think and act and speak and how we actually think and act and speak. All of these different uncomfortable things. We may become more aware of our body, of pain in our body, or of the way that the body is falling apart, or of our vulnerability, all sorts of things. And so, in a way, what I'm asking you is to hang in there for yourselves. Just like that young woman again with the foot. She kept at it. She didn't throw in the towel, even with something as simple as this homework. So really hang in there for yourselves. That's really what the courage is about. To be willing, to the best of your ability, to stay present for your own experience. And be kind and compassionate with what you see. Be kind and compassionate with what you see. Because if you're not kind to what you actually experience, you're likely to start to turn away from it. Mm. And I want to say this also. Sometimes, and particularly with the perception of impermanence, right? The perception that things are fleeting, that they're going away, that they're slipping through our hands. There can be a kind of tightening around that. There can be a feeling of tightening when we become aware of it. And what that's actually showing you is it's showing you the grasping. It's showing you the grasping at something that by its nature must pass. So I liken it in a way to rope burn. Maybe some of you are familiar with this from playing tug of war as a child, or maybe with your dog, or maybe from sailing. But rope burn is a natural injury, right? A kind of, it's a scratch, it's a blister, it's a burning, that's why it's called burn. It's a kind of painful injury to the hand, right? When you're holding on to a rope, usually it would have been like out of jute or some kind of natural fiber in the past, although now even plastic will do the same. And if you're holding on too tightly, then you get that burn in your hand, right? But if you just loosen the grip a little bit, then the rope can pass through without harm. So impermanence is similar to that. When we see the impermanence and we feel that tightening around it, that's actually creating a little bit more dukkha. That's creating a reaction that makes it more difficult for us to be willing to see it and be with it. But if we can just give it a little bit of room, we can relax the mind, relax the hand, relax the body, just enough to leave the room for it to do what it is going to do anyway. It's going to slip through our hands. That's part of the reflection, right? That's why we also gave you the 5 reflections. So courage, number 2. So continuity, courage, and then the third C is connection. Connection. So there are many different ways that we can experience connection in our practice. Many different ways. One is the Buddha held high regard for is connection with our Dharma friends. Kalyanamitta, right? Connection with Dhamma friends. This is really critical. I pointed to it a little bit when we spoke about the vipallasa, about the distortions. But it's also, I want to say, just a basic uplift, right? It's a beautiful way that we can actually help each other just by our presence and by walking the path together in whatever way we're doing that. You know? Whether you feel like you're making progress or not, whether you feel like you're doing it well or not, connecting with other folks who are on the path can be very helpful, can be very supportive. Another way that you can connect is to connect to the vastness. Connect to the vastness of all things, opening up the mind, opening up the heart, allowing for that brightness and that relaxation and that going beyond the worry and the concern of self. So this is Brahmavihara practice, for example, connecting to the vast mind of loving kindness, or the vast mind of compassion, or the vast mind of empathetic joy, or the vast mind of equanimity. Really, um, really seeing the larger picture of what this mind and body are actually all about. Mm. One practice that I used to do quite a bit, and still do actually here at Aloka Vihara, but not so much as I used to, was going out and looking at the stars. Just going out at night and looking at the stars. Because for me, one of the things that brings home is also the vastness of a human experience. We know now, because of physics, thank goodness, and astronomy, that when the light of a star reaches your eye and you see that little white dot, right? That light has traveled incredible distances, billions and billions of miles to get to your eye. And it's taken some time for that to happen. But when it does, it arrives at your eye, and it, just as we said before, a moment of contact happens, right? The eye, if it's open and there's a consciousness, and that sense object arrives at the sense door, then there's a moment of eye consciousness. But we know actually also from science that that star may not even be there anymore. That star that emitted that light, it may have already turned into more all space dust. So you, however, are connected by that thing that you see across that vast space and across that vast time by this experience of this moment. It's not mystical in any way. It's actually the way our minds and bodies work. Your mind and body is making an actual physical connection with that star. So really allow this vastness to become part of your practice. I would suggest again that it is a way that we begin to really explore for ourselves the sense of separation and how to bridge that sense of separation between ourselves and the rest of the world, whether it be people or our environment or stars. So that's the third C. So the three C's again are continuity, courage, and connection. Those three things hopefully will support you to go forward. in your everyday life with this practice of deeply investigating, deeply experiencing impermanence. Going back to what this phrase that the Buddha used in Pali, it's kayena kusitva. Kayena is the instrumental form of body, so it means with the body, kayena, and kusitva, having touched. He said, this is what we mean by direct knowing, a kind of visceral, having touched it with the body, a visceral experience. So I want to just share one more poem with you. And I want to also say that, as a group, the nuns here at Okabihara, we've been teaching from this book, The First Free Women. And what we decided was that although we read poems quite regularly as part of our teachings, various and sundry teachings that we offer, we aren't actually giving out the poems in written form or in any kind of electronic form to folks because we want to support Maddie Weingauss, who's the author of this, and support the dissemination of these wonderful, wonderful teachings. So I just put that out there so that you might feel, if you don't already have the book, that you are encouraged to maybe explore it. But I want to leave you with this poem. And this is by Bhadra Bhikkhuni, Venerable Bhadra Bhikkhuni. Her name means lucky, lucky. And this was her teaching. And I want to also add, I often imagine, because the way that monastics would gather in the time of the Buddha was at the full moon and the new moon. That's why even up to this day in the Theravada tradition, we gather together and we recite the precepts together on the full moon and the new moon each month. And that at that time, in the Buddhist time, it made sense because people didn't walk around with, a cell phone that had a calendar in it or a paper diary. They actually navigated the months by the phase of the moon. So they could look up at the sky and they could know when it was time to start walking to the meeting place where they were going to recite the precepts with their fellow nuns. So I imagine that these poems were spoken around the fire, The nuns would get together and recite their precepts, and then they would say something. They would speak in verse to one another, something about their experience of awakening. So Venerable Bhadra says this to all of us. She says, "You always considered yourself lucky because things seemed to work out the way you wanted." Or I would say, when things seemed to work out the way you wanted. You always considered yourself lucky because things seemed to work out the way you wanted. Now, luck has a different meaning. Lucky to be walking a path that finds peace in the arising and passing away of each present moment, regardless of how things work out or don't. So I'll read it to you one more time. Venerable Bhadra Bhikkhuni, one of the awakened women of the Buddha's time, says, "You always considered yourself lucky because things seemed to work out the way you wanted. Now luck has a different meaning. Lucky to be walking a path that finds peace in the arising and passing away of each present moment, regardless of how things work out or don't." So I hope that you continue this practice, this profound practice of recalling that what compels you to practice, what compels you to walk this path is impermanence itself. this body and mind as a complete manifestation